How's it going, everybody? Greg here, Gregarious Media, here with an year-end list of the top 25 best albums of 2018, or at least, that are to me the top 25. Best, all of these lists are subjective. This list should have been out a lot earlier, but of course, life kind of gets in the way of recording these things, and since I'm not really making any money off of this, I kind of have the freedom to put this out whenever I please. But yeah, I'm definitely late to the party. It's about 2 weeks into 2019 as of recording this, so I should probably shut my mouth and keep going. And I'll just put pictures of these albums on my nerdy face here. So without further ado, let's begin. Kicking off this list at number 25, we have Shane Rise with Vibe. Following what Spose did in 2017 with Good Luck With Your Life, Shane Rise decided to do a project with Goddamn Chan at the production helm, with Goddamn Chan even having his own instrumental sections, sort of sound like psychedelic RZA beats, but instead of martial arts movie samples, they're like fantasy movie samples. I can't really pinpoint where these movie samples are coming from, but they're definitely sort of within the same vein. It sounds like something that would be background to like a D&D match. It's kind of interesting. But Shane's delivery on this project is pretty lax, while still being really tight on the beat. Lyrically, going from braggadocious to personal within the next song, without any real awkward transitions. And Goddamn Chan's production ranging from really slick, soulful boom bap to hard trap bangers, all with sort of a woozy psychedelic backdrop that will easily fuck with your head if you try to dissect every element of the beats, because they're very layered in areas. It's definitely a great album, and one that I was not expecting this year, but I'm really happy that Shane Rise came out with a really solid project. At number 24, we have The Damned with Evil Spirits, their first album in a decade that was largely crowdfunded for a Pledge Music campaign and produced by Tony Visconti, I think is his name, who is David Bowie's go-to guy for most of his career. This album gained a lot of recognition, and I think for good reason. I mean, The Damned are a legendary England punk band, a punk band turned goth rock band, but they definitely have their legacy intact. And for an album that, the first one in a decade, this sounds fucking amazing. The gothic punk mix that they've used since the 80s has been revamped beautifully thanks to Visconti's production, but the songwriting itself deserves just as much credit, or else, what's the album without good songwriting regardless of the production? It's catchy, it's got an old school flair, and it's just brilliant. I think The Damned have returned with an album that not only proves their importance in music history, but also that they can still make great music even after all these years. Let's just hope that if The Damned decide to continue, that it's not, it doesn't take them another decade to release an album. At number 23, we have Hermit and the Recluse, Orpheus versus the Sirens. This is a collaborative project with MC Ka and producer Animoss. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, too. I apologize if I mispronounce a lot of these names. But the album centers around Greek mythology, with each track title referencing chapters and characters sort of within Greek mythology. And the production is minimal, but it's very lush, adding enough of a backdrop for Ka's deep and slow delivery for the listener to dissect the lyrics, which can easily get really, really heady as fuck. This is definitely one of the most lyrical albums I've heard all year, if not the most lyrical album that I've heard all year. There aren't really any bangers on this album, which is kind of why it's so low on the list, but really that's not the point of this album. It's not supposed to have these insane banging beats. This is really for Ka to do his storytelling over this really solid, minimal production that still has a lot of these melodic textures that keep you interested and kind of make you go back and listen to sort of the subtle little things that are thrown in the mix. I feel this project would have been hindered, actually, if the energy was a bit higher, because Ka just fits so perfectly over this style that I think if it were any heavier or more energetic, I think Ka's delivery would have felt a little bit out of place. So now I gotta get familiar with both of these guys' discographies, because I'll admit I've kind of fallen behind on the Ka train, and I know that he's been he's been around for a while. At number 22, we have Armies 2. Originally a duo of Dave Gutter, who is famous for main bands such as Rustic Overtones, Paranoid Social Club, Beards, and among other things. He's incredibly busy in Maine's music scene. And Anna Lombard. This is now actually a full band effort with 3 other members. We actually have people on bass and drums this time. And the sequel, I think, is even better than the debut. This album sonically has blues, funk, soul, pop, and indie-tronica mixed really beautifully and cohesively. All songs have a theme around relationships, but are approached differently each track. The Shrink is a really soulful rock song that sounds stadium-sized. Social Life is a ballad about loneliness and social media being an outlet to feel something, but getting further disconnected from reality. And Young Criminals, which I believe was the first single from this project, is a really nostalgic pop tune that about getting in trouble as a youth, but sort of getting away with it, with all these little misdemeanor things. And a song like Heavy, which is comparing a relationship to war, and it sounds, as the title suggests, I mean, for 11 songs, it really keeps jumping all these different sounds that I mentioned earlier, and yet each one flows into one another just perfectly. At number 21, we have Judas Priest with Firepower, a veteran metal band nearing 50 years into their career, churned out a late career gem that not may be revolutionary in terms of sonic varieties. This is very familiar territory if you're familiar with Judas Priest at all. They have a very signature sound at this point that they pretty much stick to. But the execution of this album, as opposed to the past maybe 2 or 3 albums, has really been executed with deadly precision on here, with opening with extremely speedy shredders like Firepower and Lightning Strike, followed by arena-shaking anthems like Never the Heroes, Necromancer, Spectre. Judas Priest really bring that classic heavy metal that they are known for and what they've solidified as the classic heavy metal sound, with a slight bit of modern production without abandoning the quality songwriting that made them legends. Which is why I think that if I ever did a top worst to best albums list, this album would probably be pretty high up there. I'm not sure if it'd be top 5, but it would easily be top 10, without question. At number 20, we got Mighty Mighty Bosstones, While We're At It. A ska band of 30 years, going into a lot of veteran bands here, but a ska band of 30 years into their career brought us a new album that only proves why the Mighty Mighty Bosstones are legends in the ska punk genre. While not as energetic as their previous release, The Magic of Youth, in which, by the way, this album is 7 years after that album. The songwriting and the production tweaks on this album, I think, really keep their formula fresh, and the lyrics are easily some of the sharpest that Bosstones have penned in years. And while the music certainly remains in the more cheery, upbeat ska punk fashion, there are little instrumental twists that keep that sound very fresh and distinct from their other albums. I mean, this album was truly an unexpected joy, and I actually went more into this album in my Discog Devil episode of Mighty Mighty Bosstones, so if you want to get a little more of a fleshed out review of it, please go check out that video, as well as getting my opinion on other albums from the Bosstones discography that I'd highly recommend. At number 19, we got Jarv with Jarvage Volume 2. The Vermont native Jarv, he's been making rounds in the New England area, and he's toured with the underground legend R.A. the Rugged Man. He's also made my top 5 year-end list last year with The Boiler Room, which was him going over Thief of Baghdad's production. And while this may not have made my top 5 this year, again, just like last year, there was super stiff competition, so Jarv, if you are watching this, man, please know this is of no disrespect. This album is definitely fucking great. I mean, this is a 17-track, majority of it being self-produced, I think outside of like 1 or 2 songs, and that's no small feat. And to make all of it super engaging and entertaining from front to back takes skill, and Jarv executes that skill near flawlessly. with boom bap being very heavy in his influences, he definitely has that 90s revival vibe in his songs. Jarv makes the old school sound refreshing, not only in his beats, but also with his very laxed, sort of very subtle delivery, but with pinpoint precision flows. He can do very small, normal, but smooth vocal deliveries, and then go into the very rapid fire, syllable per syllable speed raps without any flaw. And you can easily tell that this is not edited if you go to one of his live shows. The dude is really a force to be reckoned with. I would not sleep on this album. At number 18, we got Brockhampton with Iridescence. This is their first major label album, and the first without a mirror, in which admittedly I didn't get into sort of the whole controversy there, but I wasn't exactly super invested in Brockhampton in that way, although I did enjoy their Saturation series. This album took a sonic shift toward a more abrasive and experimental sound, while still keeping some of the boy band pop and soul here and there. And the result makes for a slightly incohesive first half, but incredible overall product. From insane bangers like Where the Cash At and District, oh my god, I love the fucking intro to that song, to the more melodic songs like San Marcos and Fabric. There are so many highlights on here that really have me anticipating sort of where they're going to go with this new trilogy that they're going to have with RCA. And I'm hoping that they really do take their time with these albums, because don't get me wrong, I love the fact that they've been putting out so many great albums within such a short period of time, but I also don't want them to burn out their creativity so quickly, because I'd say that this is probably my favorite of their albums so far, and I can't wait to see sort of where they build up from here. At number 17, we got Jack White with Boardinghouse Reach. This is easily the most experimental album of White's career, and it ends up being one of his best, where he finally approaches electronics, but in such a tasteful and unique way that it makes it stand out amongst the crowd of other rock and metal bands who have incorporated electronics since, the mid-2010s. That has honestly been really bad for rock radio. But you have riffs galore on this album with songs like Corporation and Over, strange glitchy fusions on Ice Station Zebra and Respect Commander, and really great acoustic moments toward the end of the album. And the variety and cohesion are really pleasantly unexpected combination from a musician whose key qualities to a lot of fans has been his consistency. And I would argue that while this is clearly a different album from his previous solo albums, I say that's for the better. I did enjoy his previous two albums, but I always felt like there was something missing from making the albums truly great. And this album really let his experimentation and songwriting just go balls out, and I love the end results of it. At number 16, Jeff Rosenstock with Post, stadium-sized punk alternative rock. That's really about as simple as I can put it. Very long intro and outro tracks, even though there's an intro track that's technically 7 seconds that goes into the first song of USA, but that song itself is like 7 minutes, and then the closing track is like 11 minutes long. The album keeps your attention the entire time, with also many shorter songs that also, while sandwiched in between these two extremely long intro and outro songs, to also be extremely dense. Lyrically, it's very depressing, with most of the content inspired by the 2016 elections from what I was able to gather. But instrumentally, it makes me put a dumb smile on my face, like the dopey music nerd that I am. See the first picture that opened up this video. I really should get more into Jeff Rosenstock's discography. I apologize if I'm not putting this album into great detail. It's just a really solid, fantastic listen from front to back. The production is huge without losing any of the rawness or the catchiness. And yeah, this dude is fantastic. Kids See Ghosts, self-titled, at number 15. This is the third release from the Good Music Weekly Summer Release Series, and this, I think, contains some of the best production I've heard all year. Definitely some of Kanye's best verses and performances in years, and easily Kid Cudi's best vocal performances since his first two albums. And I'm not really that big of a Kid Cudi fan, even in those first two albums, but on here, my god, he fucking kills it. Every single song. And while I think maybe a Reborn could have been cut down just a little bit in time length, the chorus sort of repeats itself a little too much, all 7 songs kept my attention, and it really, truly emphasized quality over quantity. With elements of psychedelic rock and really odd percussion samples throughout, this is really an interesting experience at the very least. It may not be for everyone, but I would definitely recommend checking this album out just to see where hip-hop really could be going. At number 14, we have Native Howl, Out of the Garden and Into the Darkness. I got into these guys through their viral hit Thunderhead, and I wasn't sure where thrash grass as a genre would go, because honestly, thrash grass, which is thrash metal and bluegrass, really outside of a parody style context, I wasn't sure where this would go, but goddamn, the band really proved me wrong. I mean, I checked out the EP and I loved it, and now they have a full album with 16 songs that not only does the thrash grass, thrashy bluegrass sort of style, but it also gets into the more electric, hard rock, and even heavy metal influences. This album jumps sonically a lot, and it's still a very cohesive listen. A couple songs might be just a little bit too long for my taste, but even then, that's just like the slightest nitpick, because the songwriting on here is truly fantastic. I mean, this explores all these different genres and influences that even at the closing 12-minute opus, Out of the Garden, this album just kept my attention and my jaw pretty much slacked throughout the entire listen, because it's like, how the fuck can they make this very niche sound so interesting and entertaining for 16 tracks? And I mean, this album is long, but it is definitely worth the length of time. At 13, we got Anderson .Paak with Oxnard, another artist who I've kind of slept on a little bit. I did listen to Malibu, and I did enjoy that. There's a couple of other projects I did that I still need to listen to. But this album funked me hard. This, with the assistance of Dr. Dre at the executive production helm, Paak takes his soulful funk sound that he had on Malibu and just cranks it up to 11 with such G-funk bravado and hard-hitting hip-hop beats. I mean, you have the smooth West Coast shit like Tints and Six Summers, really hard, super hard fucking beats on Who Are You and Mana Musa, and almost like this cinematic quality to R&B, like on the song Brother's Keeper, which is easily my favorite track. It has like this 3-part sort of experience to it, with Pusha T having a fantastic fucking verse on there, and all closing out with technically the closing track, even though there's 2 bonus tracks on pretty much every streaming site, the song Cheers, which is a tribute to Mac Miller, and Q-Tip on there tributing to Phife Dawg. I mean, this album is loaded with confidence, swagger, heart, and soul, and does not miss a fucking step. At number 12, we got The Filters, Learning to Go Underwater. These are some friends of mine from my college days. They made a folk rock band that has some jangle pop mixed in with some high energy cuts, and really dynamic mastery. The slow burn start of this album, with the song Time and Again, builds into this eruption of indie rock that, honestly, I can't see anyone resisting dancing and chanting along to. And the same applies to other high energy songs such as Sing Along and the killer harmonica solo in that song. And one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard this year, and I would say really of all time, is No Man's Land. It's their longest song with a little over 5 minutes, but holy shit, dynamics on here and the melodies are not to be understated. Do not sleep on this album. I mean, if there were any justice with sort of like the indie rock scene as it is, I'd say the Filters, even though this album is only 8 tracks long, I think really deserve to have these songs played around the fucking world. Like, this album is solid. At number 11, we have Delta Sleep with Ghost City. Math rock is not usually a genre that I really vibe with. I think the closest to that I've ever listened to, and I'm not even sure if they would technically qualify as math rock, would be Thank You Scientist. I mean, they're very technical, sort of with their weird approach to music, and Delta Sleep's earlier albums also do the same. It was much more technical than this album. This band is one that I've grown to really like over the years, and this album takes more of an indie rock angle while still maintaining their math rock roots, incorporated it in really cool, catchy, melodic ways on here that I think only improve their sound from their previous output. I mean, this is another album that's loaded with dynamic shifts, shimmering chords, and very cool, interesting melodies to very energetic distortion, anthemic chants, and very subtle complexities that keeps the composition interesting from start to finish. It's not overly technical, but they love to throw different little time signatures here and there, and it just really keeps the overall experience of this album intriguing every single time. And this is another band that you shouldn't sleep on, despite the fact that they have sleep in their name. And, yeah, fuck. I am terrible at explaining things that I enjoy so much, which is going to make the top 10 only much harder. So, let's see here. At number 10 on this list, we got Pusha T's Daytona. This was the first of the 5 Good Music summer release albums, and I consider it to be the best, in the form of 7 tracks of nonstop greatness. Pusha T really brings this cool split dynamic of sort of being this successful businessman that he is now, and sort of the drug lord aspect that he's always come from. This is some of Kanye's darkest and grittiest production, but obviously there's this very grandiose quality that only Kanye West can really incorporate in tracks like these. There are bangers loaded with bass, soul, and a really dark atmosphere, and some really odd beat switches from time to time, and that can be all in one song too. This album is just a no bullshit, barely over 20 minutes album that continues to entertain every single time I listen. It just makes you want to come back for more. And fun fact, Pusha T, I guess, had his King Push album already done, and it had about 10 tracks, and Kanye just came in and was like, hey man, you're going to release a new album over these beats, and it's only going to be 7 songs long. So I don't know what the King Push album originally would have sounded like, but I am very glad that we got Daytona. I mean, this really proved that the 7-song album, in which I know for some people may be like, oh, well, that's not an album, it's just an EP, it's 7 songs, barely 20 minutes. And sorry for my immature response there, but it's like, the quality, I think, speaks for itself. You can have these really short albums and have really good quality. And, I mean, if you're going to count, albums based on what an album is based on time length, then most hardcore punk albums would be EPs by that standard, since most of them are barely over 20 minutes or even 20 minutes at that, and they have like 15 to 16 tracks. So that's why I find that argument to be a bit kaput. But anyway, off that tangent into actually a punk album. At number 9, we have Idol's Joy as an Act of Resistance. And even though the band doesn't like having punk as a label on their sound, I mean, sorry guys, you clearly have post-punk as a very big fucking influence here. And this is easily one of the later post-punk albums at sort of its finest quality. From the opening song Colossus, which easily lives up to its title, because it sounds fucking colossal, to the roaring closer of Rottweiler, these guys bring political and social wit into their ferocious sound that all are just earworms to dance and chant along to. Every instrument is perfect in the mix. And with the bass stealing the show for a lot of these tracks, and I think for any good punk album, any album with unk at the end, whether it's punk, funk, crunk, or whatever the hell else has unk in it that isn't crunk core, I mean, bass is incredibly important, and on this album, the bass just fucking shines. And speaking of punk, we're going to keep that train going with Sonic Libido, Sorry for Being Good. Blending ska punk elements with very classic heavy metal, the main natives of Sonic Libido claim to be the worst band in ska, when they clearly sound like one of the best who should be leading the revival battle cry, even though, yes, technically ska is not dead. The Cranking and Skanking Fest of this year is very much proof of that, but despite the point, this hard ska band has absolute ragers, such as the opener, We Don't Deserve to Be Saved, and In No Uncertain Terms, mixed influences perfectly with this very anthemic, huge sound, while you have songs that just bring out the best classic ska punk vibes like Hello Charlie and Chase the Dollar. I mean, Sonic Libido is a band to really keep your eyes open on, especially if you're into modern punk scene or you're really missing that sort of ska influence sound from like the 90s and early 2000s. These guys really bring a unique spin to the sound that I hope only continues to grow. At number 7, we got Denzel Curry with Taboo, or as it's stylized, Ta 13 Ooh. A very catchy and soulful start that only progressively gets darker in tone, both instrumentally and lyrically. Taboo is Denzel's best album, without question. Expanding on his sound while sounding even better as one of the best lyricists in this generation of rappers. Arguably his most accessible album, with huge singles such as Sumo and Clout Cobain, and great deep cuts like Black Balloons and Vengeance. I mean, every feature on here is on point too. You have Jid and JPEG Mafia, who both also had incredible albums this year that just barely didn't make my cut. I mean, this album deserves all the attention that it's been receiving, and I think even more. Hopefully this really catapults Denzel Curry into bigger mainstream attention. But, you know, hopefully he doesn't lose his creativity, because fuck, this album is damn near flawless. At number 6, we got Parquet Courts with Wide Awake. This is another post-punk album with more of a funkier new wave style to it, similar to that of like a Talking Heads. These guys have some incredibly sharp lyricism with just as sharp songwriting and varying energy throughout that keeps the 38-minute listen just bopping the entire way through. I mean, the dry production actually works really well in this album, giving every instrument its contribution, really its place to shine. And even slower moments on this album, like Before the Water Gets Too High and Back to Earth, just really keep your head nodding and vibing to these really funk-fueled bass lines, shimmering guitars, and just really masterful drumming. I mean, the drumming doesn't sound super complex and intricate, but I mean, you really listen to the rhythm section on here, and it is just fucking solid. I was not expecting to enjoy this album nearly as much as I did, but I came back to this album so many times throughout the year, and just fuck, it's amazing. And now on to the top 5. We have Spose, We All Got Lost, and I made a worst to best list of this guy as sort of my debut Discog Devil series. And then he decides to release a new album, and now it's my new favorite album that he's released. So much for that fucking list. But this is easily his most ambitious project, similar to previous albums like Why Am I So Happy, but I think executed even better, with 8 out of the 14 songs having live instrumentation that Spose produced himself, fusing his love for hip-hop and alternative rock more closely than he's ever done before. Songs like Rabbit Hole and Mirror Mirror are extremely catchy. Why Do I Do This to Myself was an unexpected punk banger that really gave me a dumb, happy grin on my face, just like the opening picture. And the title track has like this really cool, almost 80s vibe when the synth kicks in. The Mountaintop, the teaser track to this album, has this really cool, bluesy soul vibe to the instrumental, and Spo's really having kind of this off-kilter flow, in which, by the way, Mountaintop actually features Armies on here. And the other producers on this album, I think, deserve just as much praise. Decap, Goddamn Chan, Polly Beats, and, I mean, while Brag Track was probably my least favorite song on here, I still enjoyed it. And there's also the song Suicide Doors, which actually there's a music video to. Was really an unexpected tribute to people who fall to depression and suicide, and acknowledging that, celebrities experience these problems as well, where, we've lost a lot of them to mental health problems and, depression, drug abuse, and suicide, that really we only kind of contribute to the problem. It was definitely a different spin to the issue that I wasn't expecting Spose to approach, but I think he did it very well on here. And, Spose, if you're listening to this, fuck you for ruining my list, but at the same time, thank you for giving me probably one of my favorite albums that you've ever put out so far. So keep up the good work. At number 4, we got Rivers of Nihil, Where Owls Know My Name. This is a tech death band mixed with some prog rock, melodic death metal, and a sax. How do I fucking describe this album? Every song switches up in tone and style, whether to give the sax some breathing room or to pummel the shit out of your eardrums with blistering riffs and rhythms in, like, hyper fast blast beat fashion. Rivers of Nihil really prove that they're a band that's going to keep your attention. The Silent Life, which is the first full track after this really brooding intro, hits you with super catchy riffs, brain-bashing kick drums, and a very gorgeous sax solo and guitar solo exchange that really goes over flawlessly, and then goes right back into tech death and catchy riffs without losing its composure. And that's the first full song. They continue this throughout 9 tracks, and it just doesn't lose momentum. And while the sax doesn't appear on every single track, it does appear very tastefully, so it's not overdone. And only 2 songs on this album are under 4 minutes, being the intro track and the instrumental Terrestria 3. But again, this album does not lose momentum. It always brings out all these varying elements that really keep you interested and invested throughout the entire runtime. And I cannot recommend this album enough. It was easily one of my favorite metal albums this year. I was about to say my favorite, but that would be a lie. I'm sorry. But I won't spoil that. At the bronze spot, we have Four Fists with 6666. P.O.S. returns with his pal, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, but he's an oddball MC who's been described as if Beck were a decade or so younger and had grown more immersed in hip-hop, and I'd say that's a pretty accurate description, and whose discography I really need to get more familiar with. This project, which I guess started originally in 2010, finally released a full album. They released an EP back in 2014, but this is like their first full-length album. And it just is so full of character, loud bangers, sharp and witty lyrics, great flows, variety in the production from trippy and dark, like Nobody's Biz and that Cornelius. I feel like I just pronounced that wrong. To some really weird pop electro songs, and really intense, gritty industrial songs, and so on and so forth. I mean, this album just has this level of variety that is still cohesive and still huge. I didn't expect this album, but goddamn, I'm so glad that it finally manifested. And goddamn Chan is actually on this album also. He produced one of the tracks on here also, which was an unexpected surprise. But yeah, P.O.S, he got my number one album of 2017, and he made it here again in my top 3. So god damn it, man. Keep it up. At number 2, we got Death Grips with Year of the Snitch, one of the decade's most interesting bands, whether you love them or not. I mean, Death Grips are definitely not for everybody. They came out with their least hip-hop influenced album so far, and instead exploring many other genres to throw into their already clustered, what I would consider brilliance, leaning more into their industrial rock influences, while also exploring more into some weird glitch, some jazz, psychedelic influences, and even more that's kind of avant-garde in nature on songs like Flies, Linda's in Custody, and The Fear. And also have moments where they just shine in more straightforward cuts like Black Paint and Dilemma. And I mean, a lot of these songs are really just hard as hell to pin down as to sort of what genre they really are. And I know some people will just say, oh, well, don't try to categorize everything. You know, genres are just a man-made blah 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 blah. But I mean, really, Death Grips just stay true to their weird form and bringing out yet another album that stands out even amongst their own catalog. And I actually did a Discog Devil episode of Death Grips, and actually in that regard I also did one on P.O.S as well, but I also did one on Death Grips more recently, and I went over this album in more detail, so please go check that out after this video. But yeah, this album almost made my number one. If it weren't for the fact that my number one is actually the only review that I had time to do, because working 40 hours a week kind of gives me a lot of hard time to actually schedule doing album reviews, and I also don't have the energy to do album reviews all the time. But the one that I actually got to review this entire year that wasn't in a Discog Devil episode with mini reviews is Voices in Vain, Narcotics, and Animal Instincts. These are also college friends of mine who are way more talented than they give themselves credit for. I mean, think of Code Orange with touches of Rage Against the Machine and Between the Buried and Me. And that's essentially kind of what you get with Voices in Vain. And I mean, you could throw other influences in there, like Every Time I Die, or System of a Down, and a little bit of Whitechapel, I guess. But essentially this groove-focused hardcore sound that they go with, lyrically channeling personal demons and political awareness, sometimes within the same song. Pretty much going over... I am terrible at describing this. Yeah, essentially, I love this fucking album, and I made a whole 18-minute track-by-track review of this thing. 9 songs, 37 minutes, all killer, no filler. This is the only album that I think I've listened to consistently almost day-to-day since its release. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, I have a list of 25 albums that I think are the best, and there are certainly more than that I've listened to, but this album I've always come back to pretty much at least once a week. I love this fucking album. I see these guys really making an impact in this new surgence of metallic hardcore and sort of the hardcore focused metalcore scene with other bands such as Knocked Loose and Great American Ghost, who actually they've played with in Portland, Maine, and the show was fucking great. But I think what really makes Voices in Vain stand out sort of in this crowd of this sort of new wave of really this metallic hardcore sound is their musicality. Their songwriting, I think, focuses a little bit more toward metal than hardcore. They use dissonance really more as a melodic backdrop, and there's even funk elements in their rhythm sections that really throw you for a loop. And also they have an 8.5 minute juggernaut closer that's just riff central, tackling humanity's greed and how Mother Nature will take her revenge on the human race. Spoiler alert, we all die at the end because Mother Nature gets her revenge. But, I mean, if there was really any justice in the music world, I'd say these guys would be up there with Knocked Loose or even Code Orange right now. I mean, this album is gold, not just in the fact that, you know, it's my number one, so it gets my gold medal, but I think this album should be certified gold. And, you know, maybe one day Voices in Vain will get the recognition that they deserve, because this album is fucking brilliant from top to bottom. And I know they're going to be releasing some new stuff later in 2019, so I can't wait to see sort of where they go from here. And that's going to do it for this list. I've probably been talking way too long, and even after editing, it's probably going to be way too long. So thank you for listening to my rambling, dumb nerdiness. Link in the description for my Spotify playlist of all these albums. I take one of my favorite tracks from each song, so it's a cohesive-ish 25-track listen from Shane Rise all the way down to Voices in Vain. And stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be the 10 most disappointing albums of the year. And please also check out my other Discog Devil episodes. Social media is in the description. And I think that's really about it. Thank you guys, and hopefully 2019 will have just as good, if not better, music. So thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. Thank you. Goodbye.